Welcome back to the channel. This is an opinion of Jim Rickards about why the government and Fed are trying to hide inflation. Jim Rickards is an American lawyer, economist, investment banker, speaker, media commentator, and author on matters of finance and precious metals. This is what he says.
Why do they keep trying to redefine the meaning of words? In June 2022, U.S. inflation was at 9.1%, the highest in over 40 years. In July 2022, the inflation rate was 8.5%. Yes, that is a decline from the June rate. But still one of the highest inflation readings since the early 1980s. Joe Biden has claimed a little credit for bringing inflation down in July. He jumped the shark and announced that inflation in July was zero. You heard that right. His exact words were, "We received news that our economy had 0% inflation in the month of July." Of course, that's preposterous. Here's the real story. Inflation is calculated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics inside the Department of Labor. They report results monthly. Each monthly report looks at the prices of a basket of over 30 separate categories such as gasoline, food, clothing, travel, electronics and so on. Inside each of these broad categories are hundreds of individual items that comprise what a typical consumer might buy in a particular month. The next step is to compare those prices for a certain month with the same month in the prior year. The basket of prices for July 2022 was compared with the same basket of prices for July 2021. The year-over-year increase in prices shows us the brutal inflation rate. As per July, that is 8.5%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Where did Biden get his zero data? He had no other option but to change some inconvenient definitions. In a desperate move to hide bad news by changing definitions, the White House looked at the price level in July 2022 compared with the price level in June 2022. In other words, they did a month-to-month comparison instead of the customary year-over-year. And that of course gives us a change in the inflation rate by minus 0.6%. You can rest assured Biden doesn't understand any of this, but he was able to mouth the words on the teleprompter. This episode of changing the definition in order to change the news is exactly what the White House and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen did when they changed the definition of recession after the Commerce Department reported 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP at the end of July. Anyway, the White House policy is clear. If you don't like the economic news, just change the definitions to get whatever result you want. That's exactly how George Orwell portrayed Big Brother in his novel 1984. He also explains that Joe Biden isn't competent enough to be Big Brother. He is mentally impaired. When he says absurd things, it's hard to tell if it's the result of cognitive decline, outright lies or a simple inability to know what he's talking about. That's not a personal attack on Biden. No one takes delight in seeing an elderly man in decline. I certainly don't. But Biden's most recent absurdity is so bad that it might possibly be the result of all three. Fortunately, we Americans are not as dumb as the White House seems to think we are. Most Americans see right through the sham. In any case, we don't need the White House to tell us about inflation. We see it in the grocery store and at the gas pump every day. Inflation may be down a bit from its peak, but it's still outrageously high, no matter what kind of spin the White House may put on it. But for the moment, let's pretend that inflation really is down as Biden says. Is that necessarily a good sign? The answer will be no. The difficulty is that U.S. inflation is coming from the supply side rather than the demand side. Since the Fed doesn't drill for oil, drive trucks or operate cranes, they can't really affect the supply side directly. What they can do is destroy demand by raising rates so high that consumers will be drained with higher mortgage rates and excessive credit card charges. This kind of inflation control can work, but it comes at a high cost, which is a severe recession. Right now, consumers are plagued with high gasoline prices, though they have declined some. Those prices will come down when consumers stop buying gas at all because they're unemployed or their businesses have failed. To paraphrase an old saying from the Vietnam War, the Fed will have to destroy the economy in order to save it. Other negative data abounds. The supply chain is still broken, but in a new way. 6 months ago, distributors and retailers were short of inventory and the shelves were bare. There's still some of that, but the delivery channels are working better now. The problem today is that distributors put in double and even triple orders to make up for shortages. Now those orders are being delivered at exactly the same time that demand has fallen off a cliff. Rickards explains that this is known in supply chain science as the bullwhip effect, where small moves at one end of the whip produce huge effects at the other end. Not only are warehouses full, but new orders are drying up. Distributors and retailers don't need more goods. Our GDP is calculated based on inventories, not final sales. So this is another huge negative for GDP in the third quarter. Initial claims for unemployment have been rising for several weeks. Real wages are declining sharply, and that's a disaster. Other signs of a more severe recession than the one we are already in keep accumulating. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta forecast for third quarter GDP growth is now plus 1.8%. But that should be compared with a prior estimate of plus 2.5%. The declining projected rate is significant. Politicians don't forecast in the usual highly inaccurate Wall Street manner. Instead, they nowcast based on data available at the time, without extrapolating or estimating data that is not yet available. We won't have an official government estimate of the third quarter GDP until late October. But based on the most recent projection, it's reasonable to conclude that the third quarter may end up in the negative column when all is said and done. Meanwhile, oil prices have been declining precipitously since June. The crude oil futures contract fell from $122 per barrel on June 8 to $86 per barrel as of today, nearly a 30% mini crash in less than 2 months. It would be nice to think this was due to a flood of supply suddenly emerging, but that's not the case. Supply is still highly constrained. What happened is that demand collapsed. You may have noticed this starting to show up in the price of gas at the pump. The price is still high, but it has come down recently and will come down more. That may be a good thing for you, but it's a bad sign for the economy because it means many Americans simply can't afford gas, are driving less, or in some cases have lost their jobs. Count this development on the side of negative economic indicators. There's more data, but you get the idea. Inflation may be coming down, not because its underlying conditions are being addressed, but because recession is causing a drop in demand. We're in a recession now, and the best estimate is that the recession will continue and get worse. But hey, at least inflation will fall.